Imagine you're standing in your bathroom right now, just opening up the medicine cabinet.
Yeah, we've all got one.
Right. And take a look at the shelves. Most of those little plastic bottles inside, they contain generic drugs.
Mm-hmm.
You probably have a daily blood pressure pill or maybe some leftover antibiotics from a sinus infection last winter or just a bottle of over-the-counter painkillers.
The standard stuff.
Exactly, the standard stuff. And we really don't think twice about them. You feel a headache coming on, you pop a pill, you go about your day.
Well, it's just reflex.
But behind that incredibly simple, everyday act is a massive, hyper-complex, and frankly, fragile global web. So today, our mission is to pull back the curtain on that web. We're unpacking a deeply eye-opening January 2026 report from Dispense.
Which stands for Business Executives for National Security.
Yes, exactly. And the report is titled Generic Drug Manufacturing and Biotechnology Innovation. And what makes this deep dive so crucial is that the authors, they aren't looking at pharmaceutical supply chains just as a public health issue.
No, not at all.
They are treating them as a glaring, critical national security vulnerability.
It really, it completely shifts the paradigm of how we view healthcare.
It really does.
To really grasp the scale of the vulnerability this report is talking about, I want you to visualize something. Imagine the backdrop behind us changing to a giant illuminated global map.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Across this map, there are these trade routes pulsing in red, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're showing a continuous massive flow of raw chemicals moving across the oceans, almost entirely from east to west.
Wow.
Yeah. We're going to transition today from understanding our everyday reliance on foreign medicine to the hidden economic and, well, geopolitical forces that actually shape this map, and finally look at how the U.S. might attempt to rebuild it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the statistics in the Dispense report, they completely shatter the illusion of the secure, fully stocked local pharmacy aisle.
They really do.
Let's just look at the sheer volume. In 2023, 91% of all drugs prescribed to Americans were generics.
91%.
We basically run on these medications. Yet, going back to 2021, an estimated 87% of U.S. generic drug manufacturing facilities were actually located overseas.
Right.
And the FDA estimates that 80% of active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs, which are the actual therapeutic molecules doing the work inside the pill.
The actual medicine part.
Exactly, the medicine part.
Yeah.
80% of those are manufactured abroad. The bottom line of all these percentages is staggering. I mean, India and China together currently supply 90% of all generic prescriptions used by Americans.
It is a profound geographical and industrial shift. I mean, the actual creation of the molecules that keep the American public functional is happening thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
Well, the domestic side has largely been reduced to just, packaging and distribution.
Putting them in the little orange bottles.
Precisely.
So to really visualize how this supply chain functions on a chemical level, think of the finished drug you take out of the bottle as a baked cake.
Okay, I like this analogy.
Right. So the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient, is the flour. It's the essential component. You literally cannot have the cake without it.
Makes sense.
But to mill flour, you first need to harvest wheat. And in the pharmaceutical world, that wheat is what the industry calls key starting materials, or KSMs.
I hate those ends, right?
These are the foundational chemical precursors, the basic building blocks that get synthesized into the APIs.
That analogy tracks perfectly with the industrial reality. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it reveals what the report identifies as a cascading dependency.
A cascading dependency. Okay, how so?
Well, the U.S. imports 40% of its finished generic dosages directly from India. Because of this sheer volume, India is frequently called the pharmacy of the world, producing roughly 20% of all global generics.
That's a massive market share.
It is. However, India doesn't grow its own wheat, to use your analogy.
Oh.
Yeah. India manufacturers import roughly 80% of their APIs directly from China.
Wait, 80%? So India is operating these massive commercial bakeries, baking all the cakes for the global market, but they are buying almost all of their flour from a single source.
Exactly. Which means the U.S. supply chain is infinitely more brittle than direct trade data suggests.
Wow.
If a disruption occurs in China, it doesn't just impact the U.S. directly. It immediately starves India's pharmaceutical output. It halts the global assembly line.
That's terrifying.
It is. If that flow of materials stops, it's not some abstract economic problem.
Hmm.
It means that within weeks, your local pharmacy is putting up out-of-stock signs for the exact medications keeping your community healthy. And that happens regardless of whether direct U.S. trade with India remains perfectly intact.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second, though. I mean, I love walking into a pharmacy and getting a generic antibiotic for $4 instead of 40.
Sure, we all do.
Right. If offshoring the manufacturing to countries with lower labor costs gave consumers the absolute lowest drug prices among peer nations, why are we suddenly treating this system as a crisis? Isn't cheaper medicine inherently a massive win for the public?
Well, it is a win for the consumer's wallet in peacetime, absolutely. But it ignores the stark economic realities of the generic drug market versus deliberate state strategy.
Okay, break that down for me.
Let's look at the U.S. exodus first. The BNS report points to the year 2000, specifically the World Trade Organization Pharmaceutical Tariff Elimination Agreement.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's important. This agreement essentially wiped out tariffs on pharmaceutical trade among participating countries, which acted as a massive accelerator for offshoring.
Because the companies could just move wherever it was cheapest.
Exactly. You see, the profit margins on generic drugs are razor thin. They're treated like commodities. For a U.S. company, maintaining a domestic production facility means bearing higher labor costs, higher energy costs, and meeting incredibly stringent environmental and FDA regulatory standards.
Right, which all costs money.
A lot of money. So competing against foreign manufacturers who didn't face those same costs simply became a mathematical impossibility.
And the report highlights a deeply human example of this exact dynamic.
Yeah, it does.
In 2004, a manufacturing plant in West Virginia owned by Viatris, which was formerly known as Mylan, it permanently closed its doors. That single closure laid off 1,400 American workers. But the strategic loss was far more alarming than the economic one, honestly.
Because of what they were making.
Exactly. That facility was the very last factory producing penicillin in the United States.
The very last one.
We allowed the capability to produce one of the most fundamental, foundational antibiotics in modern medicine to simply vanish just because the quarterly margins didn't work out.
The U.S. treated generics as a low-margin commodity to be outsourced, period.
Right.
But contrast that market-driven approach with China's state-directed capitalism, which viewed biotechnology as a vital geopolitical lever.
They saw the bigger picture.
They really did.
Yeah.
China began investing heavily in this sector way back in the 1980s. By 1987, PRC scientists had already developed their first domestic biopharmaceutical, a recombinant human interferon A1B.
Which is what exactly?
It's a synthetic protein used to fight viral infections. Achieving that in the late 80s proved they weren't just mixing basic chemical powders, They were mastering complex biological manufacturing processes.
And their ambitions scaled exponentially from there. They rolled out massive, highly coordinated national policies like Made in China 2025, which was explicitly designed to capture global leadership in high-tech manufacturing, biotech included.
Right. It was a very clear roadmap.
And their human capital strategy was equally aggressive, like
Yeah.
the 1,000 Talents program, which sought to recruit top scientists back from Western institutions.
Yeah, that was huge.
The report cites a Stanford University analysis showing that scientists returning to China through this program produced 27% more publications than their international peers. Yeah, they effectively re-imported the knowledge generated in Western labs to accelerate their own development by decades.
And to compound that technological leap, they leveraged their massive domestic population to engineer economies of scale that just completely crush free market competition.
How do they do that?
Take China's National Volume-Based Drug Procurement Policy, or NVDP, which was enacted in 2025. This policy consolidates pharmaceutical demand across the entire country's medical institutions into massive government contracts.
Meaning they guarantee a manufacturer an astronomical volume of sales, but in exchange, the manufacturer has to drop the per unit price to the floor.
Exactly, the mechanism at play.
Right.
By guaranteeing that much volume, the state can force manufacturers to slash prices by up to 80%.
80%, that's insane.
Yeah. Factories can run 24/7, dropping per unit cost to mere pennies. It creates a state-subsidized engine of scale that domestic companies operating in smaller, fragmented free markets simply cannot compete with.
So the U.S. chased the lowest possible price at the pharmacy counter, while China built an industrial juggernaut.
Basically.
But relying on surface-level trade data actually lulls us into a false sense of security here. The report dives into something called the Vital 40.
The Vital 40, yes.
This is a list compiled by the API Innovation Center of 40 essential life-saving APIs. We are talking about the heavy hitters of modern medicine. Propofol for anesthesia, capecitabine for cancer treatment, and crude broad-spectrum antibiotics.
And if you look at the direct import data for those Vital 40, the supply chain doesn't actually look entirely monopolized.
Right, it looks somewhat diverse.
Yeah, the numbers show India supplying 63% of these APIs, Europe providing 22%, China supplying 8%, and the U.S. managing 5%.
Here's where it gets really interesting. That 8% figure for China is a complete mask. It obscures the deeper foundational dependency.
It goes right back to your baking analogy from earlier and those key starting materials.
The wheat.
Exactly, the wheat. When you drill down past the APIs to the raw chemical level, the picture changes entirely.
How bad is it?
Well, the report reveals that China is the sole global supplier for the KSMs of 679 different APIs.
Wait, sole global supplier.
The sole global supplier, let me reiterate that. For nearly 700 essential chemical precursors, they are the only source. Meanwhile, the United States and the European Union combined are the sole suppliers for only 44.
It's an astronomical disparity, and it means that the United States has virtually zero surge capacity.
Zero.
Let's say a massive geopolitical crisis hits tomorrow and global trade suddenly halts. The U.S. government can't simply invoke the Defense Production Act, point to that 5% domestic API production, and order them to scale up and cover the national shortfall.
No, they can't.
You can build the state-of-the-art factory, you can hire the skilled workers, but if you do not have those foundational chemical raw materials to feed into the synthesis machines, you basically just have a multi-million-dollar paperweight. The dependency is absolute.
And with that terrifying vulnerability mapped out, we have to look at what could actually trigger a collapse of this supply chain.
Right. What's the spark?
Well, these aren't theoretical risks. The system is already fracturing under normal conditions. In 2024, the U.S. recorded its highest number of drug shortages to date.
Just in regular times.
Yeah. The FDA reported 323 medications were affected. Crucially, antibiotics proved especially vulnerable, experiencing shortages at a rate 42% higher than other generic drugs.
And the BNS report categorizes the true threats into three major matrices. The first is climate and disaster risks. The underlying mechanism of failure here is single-site production. When the global market consolidates production of a specific drug into one facility or one geographic region to maximize efficiency, natural disasters become catastrophic events for the whole world.
It creates a massive choke point.
Exactly. The report points to Hurricane Maria in 2017. That storm devastated Puerto Rico. And it just so happens that Puerto Rico produced 44% of the intravenous or IV fluids used across the entire U.S. healthcare system.
Wow.
Yeah, one localized weather event caused prolonged nationwide hospital shortages.
And beyond sudden catastrophic storms, the industry faces the slow-moving crisis of resource scarcity. API manufacturing is incredibly water-intensive.
But for cooling and stuff.
The chemical synthesis, the cooling, the extensive purification processes, they require vast amounts of fresh water. And the key industrial regions in China and India where this production is hyper-concentrated are currently facing severe intensifying water stress.
That's a huge problem.
It is. Future regional droughts or strict state-mandated water allocation policies to protect drinking supplies, they could force immediate production cutbacks. That instantly reduces the global availability of medicines.
Which brings us to the second major risk category, pandemics and health crises. We don't even have to look far back into history to see how this plays out. Think back to March 2020.
Oh, yeah.
As COVID-19 was rapidly spreading, India temporarily banned or restricted the export of 26 APIs and pharmaceutical formulations. This included incredibly common critical medications like paracetamol, which is acetaminophen, and various antibiotics.
Let's cut them off.
They did it to protect their own domestic supply first. It demonstrated with crystal clarity exactly how fast even close, reliable allies will lock down critical exports when a global health crisis hits.
In a true emergency, national survival will always supersede global trade agreements.
Always.
But the third category is perhaps the most complex to navigate. Geopolitical escalation risks.
Right.
This involves the deliberate weaponization of supply chains. The BNS report impartially details how China's 2020 export control law provides the state with extensive legal power to utilize exports, including pharmaceuticals, as a strategic geopolitical tool.
They wrote it right into the law.
Yes. And the report points to a very recent precedent outside of the healthcare sector to demonstrate how this mechanism works in practice.
Right. On October 9th, 2025, Beijing announced new export controls on rare earth elements. These are materials absolutely crucial for advanced U.S. technologies like electric vehicles, drones, and missile guidance systems. The willingness to restrict critical materials is already on the table.
The precedent is there.
Yeah. If that exact same mechanism were applied to the biotechnology sector, the report warns of a devastating bullwhip effect.
The bullwhip effect is crucial to understand here. Because supply chains are so long and lean, a small disruption at the very beginning, say a 5% drop in the export of those foundational KSMs, it creates compounding chaos.
Just from 5%.
Just from 5%. Manufacturers panic buy, logistics back up, and by the time the effect reaches the end of the chain at the pharmacy level, that small initial delay has amplified into massive, prolonged shortages of finished pills.
And this isn't just a civilian public health issue either. The report references a 2023 Department of Defense study revealing that 27% of all U.S. military drugs depend on PRC suppliers.
27%. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises an important question regarding military readiness. How can a nation's armed forces ensure operational readiness and care for deployed troops if over a quarter of their critical medical supplies rely on a strategic competitor?
It's a huge vulnerability.
It elevates the issue from a healthcare challenge directly to a matter of existential national security.
So having mapped out this incredible fragility from the loss of domestic penicillin to the absolute chokehold on key starting materials, it's completely natural to wonder, what on earth is the government actually doing about this?
Yeah, you'd hope they're doing something.
Right. Which brings us to the proposed path forward, and specifically the limits of our current strategy. The U.S. government does have mechanisms in place, like the Strategic National Stockpile, the SNS, which is meant to be a physical buffer for emergencies.
The massive warehouses.
Exactly. The report also notes the Trump administration's August 2025 executive order, which aimed to expand something called the Strategic Active Pharmaceutical Ingredients Reserve, or SAPAR. The strategy there was to identify and physically stockpile the APIs for about 26 essential medicines.
It is an objective, immediate approach to secure physical materials before a crisis hits.
Right.
Because APIs generally have longer shelf lives than finished, formulated drugs, stockpiling them reduces risk at multiple stress points in the supply chain.
But hold on, let me push back a bit here. If we are actively building massive warehouses full of these raw APIs across the country, doesn't that largely solve the problem? Like, if the global tap gets turned off, we just tap into the strategic reserve and keep the pharmacies stocked, right?
It creates a buffer, yes, but it fundamentally does not solve the underlying structural deficit. The BNS report is explicit on this front. Stockpiling is inherently a passive defense mechanism. Right. It buys you a window of time. But a stockpile is ultimately just a bucket of finite resources. If you do not have a functioning, scalable industrial base, the physical factories, the synthesis capabilities, and the specialized workforce to replenish that stockpile, it will inevitably run dry during a prolonged crisis.
Which is exactly why the BNS report outlines a 5-point coordinated approach to actually rebuild the architecture of the supply chain rather than just putting a temporary Band-Aid on it.
Exactly.
First, they argue for targeted investments. We're talking about direct fiscal incentives, tax credits, grants, and low-interest loans to make building domestic API and KSM facilities financially viable against those heavily subsidized foreign markets. You have to change the math for the manufacturers.
You really do. Second, they recommend implementing Buy American mandates for sensitive government sectors.
Like the military.
Yes. This would require agencies like the Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs to source essential medicines exclusively from domestic or trusted ally facilities. By utilizing the government as a guaranteed buyer, you create a baseline market, giving domestic companies the financial security they need to actually invest in localized production.
Makes total sense. Third is enhanced supply chain transparency. The government currently operates with massive blind spots. The report recommends requiring pharmaceutical manufacturers to legally disclose the geographic origins of their APIs, their KSMs, and the finished products.
We need to know where it's all coming from.
Exactly. The goal is to build a comprehensive national database to map these choke points so we actually know where the wheat for the flour is coming from before the supply is cut.
Right. Fourth is advancing manufacturing innovation. The harsh reality is that the U.S. will likely never beat overseas manufacturing on sheer labor costs.
It's just too expensive here.
Yeah. So the strategy must rely on technological superiority. The report highlights heavy investment in continuous manufacturing.
How does that differ from how they do it now?
Well, traditionally, drugs are made in a slow batch process, mixing ingredients in giant vats, stopping, testing, moving it to another facility. It's very disjointed. Continuous manufacturing is an unbroken, highly automated assembly line.
Oh, wow.
Raw materials go in one end and finished pills come out the other in one continuous flow. It drastically cuts the physical footprint of a factory, reduces labor needs, and fortifies the infrastructure against disruptions.
That sounds incredibly efficient. And finally, the fifth point acknowledges geopolitical reality, nearshoring, and allied partnerships. We simply can't manufacture everything here at home.
No, that's impossible.
So where domestic manufacturing isn't feasible, the U.S. needs to strategically promote sourcing from trusted allies with robust regulatory standards, places like Canada, the European Union, and Japan. It's about diversifying the risk portfolio away from single high-risk nations.
It will require a holistic, rigorously coordinated effort across government, private industry, and academia to build both the physical infrastructure and the specialized workforce capable of sustaining this massive shift over the coming decades.
So what does this all mean? For decades, you and the entire American healthcare system have benefited from incredibly cheap generic drugs. It kept insurance premiums manageable and out-of-pocket costs low at the pharmacy counter. But this deep dive makes it undeniably clear that the hidden cost of those savings was handing the keys to our national health over to a precarious, hyper-concentrated foreign supply chain.
We traded structural resilience for immediate efficiency.
Exactly. And rebuilding that resilience is going to require immense time, substantial investment, and a total paradigm shift in how we value these products. Medicine can no longer just be viewed as a consumer good. It has to be treated as critical national infrastructure.
I completely agree. And I will leave you with this final thought to mull over. For the better part of a century, when we thought about national security and strategic assets, we pictured steel production, microchips, stealth bombers, and aerospace engineering.
The big stuff.
The big stuff, right. But the next time you open your medicine cabinet, take a closer look at those generic bottles. In an era of incredibly complex global interdependence, what if the most decisive strategic asset of the 21st century isn't a kinetic weapon system at all, but the chemical precursor to a simple, life-saving antibiotic?
Wow. It completely changes how you look at the everyday items keeping you healthy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we'll see you next time.